So instead of having slides or formal presentations, I'm going to moderate. I'm just going to ask questions, and they can take turns answering. And then if you guys have questions, yes. So I'll go first with the frequency of use the layered learning model. Perhaps what tactic worked best, and what thing that you think we need the department to work on the most?
So I've had the opportunity to do it a few times. I think the most common examples are when you have an APP student and then a PGY1 or PGY2 resident. I think that tends to work a little better because the gap of knowledge is a lot greater. It is a little more challenging for at least me when I had the, I guess, misfortune of having a PGY2 and PGY1 and splitting services. And I think what I thought I was going to do going in and what it ended up doing were also kind of two different things. And my intention was to target the highest level of knowledge on the team. And I found by doing that I totally left whoever wasn't on that wavelength in the dust. And so I felt like I had to go back and sort of re-explain things a lot. I don't know if you all have had that experience as well, but I found it maybe a little easier to start, with a baseline level of knowledge and then supplement the higher level of knowledge on top of that. But I found that more of a challenge than I thought it would.
I find that, I've primarily done it with APP students as well. We've had a couple of rotations where we've had PGY2, PGY1 on general ID together, but I think Brian precepted those largely. I think I precepted students with PGY1 residents and students with PGY2 residents. I think the greater challenge almost is the PGY2 because that gap is larger.
Yeah.
And I think, there's one fundamental thing that comes along with that rotation is you almost sacrifice the level of discussion with the PGY2 resident in favor of their precepting experience with the student, because you do have to cater to the baseline knowledge that shows up. But I think that also underscores, as part of orientation with a resident, which was sort of alluded to in the paper, that you really have to discuss ahead of time what the resident expectations are. And the more that they can prepare the student to meet with you, the better experience they will get out of it, because then you'll be able to move on to more in-depth discussions of complex topics and stuff like that. So that's where I've struggled along the way, and I've sort of learned that probably too late, that that's really critical, because otherwise we're talking about really foundational things that kind of are not as helpful to the PGY2.
Yeah, I think I guess I'm just thinking about the medical model in a way, but I think there probably is some programs that don't really talk to the student level about, like, all right, here's how you work up your patients, like here's how you do, so that conversation isn't even had by someone at quote our level. But it tends to be more of the resident that handles all that. And so what you meet and discuss with them, it's sort of more of a topic-based thing, or hitting gaps of knowledge that the resident has, so then they can share that with the student. I think that's the way I'd like to see it work, but I struggle with it.
And sometimes to compensate, you can just ask the student to go look up whatever the foundational issue is, so you can kind of save time a little bit that way. But if they're completely lost, then maybe not.
Time of year also matters when you're talking about. So I've had the opportunity to do this with like student PGY1 and PGY2 all at the same time, which was crazy looking back, and not necessarily something I want to do often, but it just happens with the way we do our scheduling in terms of wanting to give people the experiences they want to get and how the students are scheduled. So I think that in the beginning of the year, there's a couple of challenges because the PGY1 specifically is trying to define themselves as a practitioner. They're going from student to clinician, especially early in the year. That's a hard transition. So to ask them to precept on top of that is difficult. So in the case, the two cases I've been thinking of where this happened, it was nice to have the PGY2 resident really support and provide that mentoring to the PGY1. But it really does, the gap of knowledge really becomes very evident when you have all these three layers of learners. And in the case I can think of one, the downside of this is you start hiding things about some of the learners. So for example, the strength of the PGY2 might shield the fact that the PGY1 is actually struggling with something. That's something that I've noted now a couple of times where, it was an early rotation that we had the PGY1, and, based on working with them, we didn't pick up on an issue that came up later on because the PGY2 was, supplementing the whatever aspect that where there's a weakness. So that's one interesting downside of this is that, because you can't talk to them all. You can talk to them all at once, but you can't figure out like, okay, did the PGY2 tell them to look at this information? That's why they know it, or is it that the actual resident actually looked up on their own? Will they continue that going forward? So it's been quite a challenge. It's very time consuming. So it sounds like it won't be time consuming, but it is. But it's kind of interesting because you get to expand what you're doing, because if you set it up and set your expectations like this article was talking about in terms of like, okay, you're going to go do student, you need to do all of the med histories, for example. And then you tell the resident, okay, you need to oversee the doing and entering of all the med histories. You start dividing up tasks like that, you end up kind of expanding your services, but at the same time you have to QA all of that. You have to make sure as the senior preceptor, to use the verbiage on the article, that you have to make sure it's all being done right. And so at the beginning of the year, you're going to do a lot more QA than you are middle or later in the year. So time of year really makes a big difference. I think if I had to do it again, or will do it again, I would prefer to do it later in the year, because at the end of the year it just presents a lot of challenges.
I think one perspective from the school pharmacy is that we're like front-loading rotations so that they can be competitive applicants for residency. And so, we have far more people here in like July, August, September, October than we do February, March through the end of the year. But that sometimes we just have to work with that as we get it. But as the campus grows, which the P3 class is growing, then that should balance out a little better. So one thing that I heard that I thought that I read in the article, and then I've heard from you all, is that perhaps we could optimize the APPE orientation to include the practice model, because that was in here, and how to work out the patient, and do some basics for like everybody when they start, so that each preceptor isn't doing that. We get them Epic access and make sure they know where to find the formulary, but beyond that, there's not a lot of standardization of what they do. And I know some of the programs that do the block scheduling with APPE students have a really structured orientation, and so that's probably a way that I can help everybody is to include some of that.
That would be wonderful. Even just setting expectations for things you should know about your patient before you meet with your preceptor.
Questions from the audience? Jazzing this up. No slides, it's just a conversation.
Any other questions?
So you talked about challenges. Winston talked about, can you talk about some other things that went really, really well that you would always do over and over again?
I don't know. I never
It's
felt
been
like,
that flawless.
Well, there's something that was a must repeat. Every like in feedback was they keep doing, stop doing. So
I think one thing I've learned over the years is if you have a student who's struggling, and it's time to have a conversation about that, that having the resident prepared to participate in that discussion is a great learning opportunity for them, because probably they're a resident here because they were an overachiever, and this may be the first time they're encountering someone who really needs a lot of support, and then to help train them in terms of how to provide that support, I think is a really useful skill, and how to deliver that message. I do it perfectly, but,
the most disservice we could do to any of them is to shield them from that. Because it'll be some point in life where you have to have a difficult conversation, so you may as well do it early on. And even I read in here, it talked about some of the preliminary resources residents needed were conflict resolution and difficult conversation skills.
But I think emphasizing not just to be part of the discussion, but to talk about it ahead of time,
Yes.
how they are going to contribute to the discussion, and what their observations are, and asking open-ended questions about what support do you think you could provide, or what advice do you think you could provide to help this person with said issue, and then to help deliver the message, rather than just kind of showing up and being passive and watching how you do it.
Right.
I think the last time we did this, I had the PGY1 resident actually help me with the student, like midpoint, like going through each section. I think that's something that worked well, because one, it gave me a lot more insight into the student's performance, because the PGY1 is working very closely with them, and so I got actually to know more about how the student was doing than I normally would have necessarily. And then also, I think it gave the resident a really great opportunity to kind of evaluate on the things that they were just being evaluated on not too long ago, especially earlier in the year, and then for the PGY2 to actually help with the PGY1 eval as well. Like I think I did that last time, and it took a lot of burden off of me in terms of having to get everything put together, but I feel like it provided the PGY2 some additional insight into how you evaluate someone who's kind of your peer, but like, you know, you're also in this situation, set up differently. And then orientation. So the one thing I think I did well, at least since my experience, was at the beginning I sat down, I went through like kind of what the expectations were from each of them. This is what this article talked about. I didn't do a lot of the things it talked about, unfortunately, like the pre-involvement and all that stuff. I thought those were good ideas, and I wish I had done that. But the one thing I did do was I did talk about how I wanted to, I kind of said, like, you guys have been with rounding teams, you see how the attending talks to like the fellow and then the residents, like we're going to follow the same type of thing. And I used that analogy to explain to them, and everyone seems to get it, and get like who their chain of command was to go to when they needed help. So I think that's something I would do every time, for sure. And maybe using that analogy helps people understand, because everyone's grounded with that type of team typically at that type of or senior members.
I guess just dovetailing with the evaluation topic, which isn't something I will say falls into the category of something I've done really well, is sort of, I'm going through it now, it's probably the most complex way that I ever have, in that we've had 2 students, 2 residents, and a team of people helping. But I think it makes me wonder if it would be helpful to have a curriculum or something early in the year for our residents that really underscores the elements of a good evaluation, like we've gotten when we go through our surveys and that sort of thing. Because they're self-evaluating and they're reading what you write, but I don't know if they're really internalizing the feedback the way to give feedback that's really helpful. And it's some of it's the talking about what they did rather than how they did it and things like that. But I think that might be a helpful thing to do for everyone that could carry them through their year. And then I think really emphasizing at the beginning or before the rotation as part of this pre-involvement stuff too, is that it is the resident's job to do the evaluation. Even though your name is on it and ultimately you're responsible, at least for now, it's their job to fill it out, and that should be something they're thinking about throughout the block.
It's also their job to do the calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we did do that, and that worked out really well.
And that's something I did. Yeah, I definitely will take that away. I think that was one thing I did as a teaching opportunity, was we both independently did the evaluation, and it was kind of interesting to see where we agreed and disagreed on, and some of it's just they had more insight into a situation than I did, but also it was good to look at like the context of what I was saying versus they were, and that usually, so one thing I always try to impress upon people who are writing evaluations is to think about, like, for everything there's something constructive that you can learn. Like even the best people, I think, have room for improvement, and I think you get a lot more of, in their head, I think their summarization is like, oh, they're great, and that's kind of all they want to say about it. But it's also, when you kind of pick beneath it, there's always opportunity to provide like kind of minor critiques in style and that kind of thing. So I think that was something I think that worked well for me, was kind of having us do it instead of just sitting down and doing an evaluation together, where really my impressions are dominating theirs that make them do it, and we kind of compare it.
So something I heard that would be useful at the beginning of the year for the residents would be like training on good evaluation, good feedback, perhaps even some more standardized training on the evaluation tool. Like that, if we could have someone from BCU or
I appreciate that. I'm using a new one for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It's vague, and most of the categories aren't really applicable. Yeah.
For the other schools of pharmacies too, because they're all slightly different.
Right. Oh yes, they're all different.
By slightly different, yeah.
I hate Derek.
Heather and Steve had both mentioned that for the PGY2s, they felt like maybe the expert level discussions were not as frequent as they were. Did you guys find any strategies that made you more likely to be successful in those? Did you try to target certain areas, or?
So it ended up being more independent than I wanted it to be for expert level, in that we would start with a baseline topic, and I would turn to, say, Emily or someone and say, all right, now these are the pieces of this you need to know, look at them, and we'll have some kind of brief discussion about it. But So that's the way I handled it. I don't know that I love that because it forced her to kind of look at things on her own. I don't know that she fully got to integrate, what her thoughts and my thoughts were together about that. But I think that discussion would have been too high a level that the student really couldn't have participated in, or even a PGY1. So I don't have great thoughts. I'd be curious what you guys do.
Yeah, I mean, I've done something similar where you're in the moment, you say, oh, you need this paper, I'm sending it to you now. Read
Yes.
this. And then the other place I think it works better is when you have a planned topic discussion and everybody's done all the reading and you can show up and do it. But I think one of the things this article mentions is that our time is getting much shorter these days, and time for that is at a minimum. And so we kind of have to look for other opportunities to bridge that gap. But I'm not sure I know what the answer is.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think
you guys do a great job too.
Yeah, I've been curious too, seeing, again, just looking at our colleagues in other disciplines where there probably is more PGY1 level or more upper level mentorship, even in terms of knowledge. I don't know we have talked about that as much. We talked a lot about practice mentorship, but is there some responsibility for the residents, the upper level residents, to lead discussions about the basics with the younger groups? And that way, when we have topic discussions, they are focused, therefore a higher level, if we don't have to go through that stuff.
And I think that's mentioned in here too.
Yeah, that's something I probably
That's a resident job.
Yeah, and it's something that I don't need to be there for,
Right.
And that's the way the medical world works as well, is they self-lean, no, it could be that they're passing out erroneous information, but we'll probably come across that, but I just wonder if, we probably will think more towards that the next time around.
Yeah, and I definitely had that happen with the PGY2 resident, doing a lot of board discussions with the PGY1, just on less of the specialized things. I guess for transplant, one of the benefits is that even the PGY2 early on is getting kind of a more basic look at things. So even though we're going to go in more depth, it's still everyone's getting the same basic refresher early on. So that was the plus side of having everybody early on, is everyone's starting roughly on the same area. But yeah, that's certainly a challenge at the end of the year. And so how I've handled it is basically separating them. And a lot of our rotations are team taught. We have multiple clinical pharmacists from the teams working. So typically we've done that where we've separated out and said okay, can you talk to Jill about, or the resident about this, and PGY2, and then the PGY and student are going to talk to me about another topic, and kind of separate it out so that you can address the appropriate level. So leveraging our teams and having multiple preceptors present, I think, helps. And then just from a learning perspective, when we have been successful in having multiple discussions, inviting multiple members of the team at the same time, it also was able to facilitate their discussion. We were able to do that a couple of times successfully, but something in the future I think hopefully we'll do more.
The other thing we did this block but haven't had a chance to kind of evaluate how well it's going to go is we created active learning tools for the students. So we took some of the major topics, gave them readings, and then gave them cases and had them answer questions about it just on their own time in a document. So then they get, a foundational knowledge where they can't just read something and say they've read it, but they actually have to evaluate it and apply it to a patient, a theoretical patient or what have you.
Yeah, I know the schools love tools anything where you get objective data out of a rotation. I think is really highly viewed by ACP and those groups.
Yeah.
Then when you gave them the questions, then somebody had created them?
Yeah, so that was done by me.
That part.
So that's what we're working on.
Because I'm thinking you might have saved some time in one aspect, but you lost it.
Yeah, I knew one of the faculty members, another position I worked at, did a pre and post test, and it was an electronic thing and they were different data set, different questions, but he would basically measure performance pre and post rotation. Just kind of a good idea too. But it was all automated, he had set it up once, and that was all he had to do with it.
Yeah, and I tried to do that in this block too, is to have more discrete projects that would be evaluated, but of course then you have to schedule the time to do it, and schedule the time to give feedback, and schedule the time to write about it, and it's a lot. Yeah, especially when you're doing layered learning, and you have to ultimately do all of the evaluations at the same time.
From the ED perspective, because you guys do this often, and you just had a big group, what sort of things do you think work well, didn't work need to change, could be changed to help everybody in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I'm torn between having layered learning versus next year. I think we're trying to schedule more of the same level of learners. We have a number of preceptors, and we can do team teaching, but just our space is so limited that we can't really separate and have different topic discussions unless we get somebody out of the office or they're scheduled on different days. The thing that I found most successful when we've either had a PEDS resident or a critical care resident is, all right, we're going to talk about rapid sequence intubation, and there's based on expectations for like a PGY1 and for a student, and then for the resident, we'll say, I want you to have an opinion on autonomy in the use of trauma, where it's like they have to go and do like a specific literature search and something that's not, there's not like a clear answer to it, and convince us one way or the other. So we try to do that with our PGY2s for topic discussions. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. We've tried to do like pro-con debates with our PGY2s as well, like do one of those a week. When we've had the time to do it, it's worked really well. I think it worked well with Emily when we had her. Actually, she wasn't even a PGY2 at the time. She was a PGY1 and agreed to student rotation with us. But it's difficult. Just the timing of everything is difficult, and you spend a lot of time divvying up tasks, but you also there's only a certain number of experiences, and you want to try to give everybody an experience to like a massive trauma or whatever. You want to get everybody in there, but managing 3 learners in a room at a time, just having that number of people is probably not conducive to good patient care. Being able to manage the patient along with the 3 learners is not always feasible. So we have to identify tasks that are at the levels of the individuals. So I do think sometimes we're pretty good with that. Like if we get a question from a nurse that needs an answer in the next 30 minutes versus needs an answer in the next 2 minutes, that may be something that we assign to a student. If we've got them on this.
From a global perspective, other things that would make this go more smoothly. I know some of our resident and student rotation start at the same time, and sometimes they don't. And obviously, the outgoing preceptor needs to be understanding if the new preceptor for the resident is asking them to do some pre-work, like with their on one rotation, but they're about to move to another one. I think we all have to be understanding of those things. But from a scheduling perspective, what could I do differently to help you all? I mean, I already have a student scheduled for next year.
Yeah.
I think the pre-work that we've already discussed would be.
I mean, I feel like more of the needs are maybe more on the pharmacist scheduling end that are more difficult, and things like team space and like areas conducive to team-based learning.
I did cite us as being partially compliant and having enough space in our survey, so maybe
we sat down and
that'll
did
help.
that together.
I think we have a folder that we set up, and it's the same folder we use for residents and for students with all our readings in them, and the students don't always have access to the O drive, and we usually try to ask Mark, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's not, I'm sure, I know it's not an issue with you. Sometimes they can click in O Pharmacy to get there, sometimes they have to go directly with the link.
Could we create a folder that's student only that we could all have our teams in it?
So like my vision that I haven't had time to execute is to have like a website that's like, so we have the residency website, we have the intern website, but to have like an APPE website and maybe an IPPE website. And the first thing on it would be like, if you would, like those random people who start calling you all from out of the blue to get a rotation from Montana or something, like people go to one singular place to start that conversation, but then to have the forms that they need to fill out in order before they start a rotation, and the same parking information, so I don't answer that question 112 times over and over, or how they get computer access and like the general orientation stuff. And then perhaps we could build from that. Then you know, if you have an ID rotation, this is your folder. Look in here for what you need. Now, if it's outside of the firewall, which it would need to be, then we've got the issue with copyright and like dumping articles there and that sort of that thing.
Could it be that once they have their UA credentials that they can access
Yeah,
stuff for their
that could
rotation?
work, yeah.
Like a SharePoint.
Then that's greater incentive to get that done anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But we use Dropbox for that purpose. I think my rotation and then the card seat rotation. So we've been utilizing that, of course, not with any like HIPAA things, but just the curriculum, I guess.
Well, in all of our rotation descriptions, like for the school pharmacy, we need like a once over. You know, we spent the whole last year doing all the residency ones. All the school pharmacy ones need to be cleaned up, but that's the next project. So a shared folder place that each service line could put their core curriculum kind of stuff would be beneficial to everybody. Okay. Or at least it would be beneficial. Everyone doesn't have to use it. All right. We're actually right at like 2:30. Are there other questions, thoughts? Did you like the informal panel? They liked not preparing slides. Yeah. They're being waylaid by Michelle at some point to come sit in the front of the room. So, other thoughts? Okay. Well, if you think of anything in the middle of the night or whatnot, let us know. We can put
Well, don't call me, but
well, right. Don't call me either. I'm actually going to sleep tonight. It happened the last 2 nights because I've been thinking about the match list. So. But you know, if you think of something later on, you know, shoot us an email and we'll figure it out. All right, thank you guys.